The UAE announces it is leaving OPEC and OPEC Plus, effective Friday, the May 1st. UAE forces are also out of Yemen as Saudi airstrikes hit Emirati ships in December. The Abraham Accords still hold. Tonight we decode whether all this is energy-centric, a political decision, or the moment the GCC stopped being one bloc. And from New York, the 11th Review Conference of the Non-Proliferation Treaty opened on Monday. The treaty that was meant to slow this down is, by every honest reading, breaking. We ask whether it can still hold. 2 days after the Stockholm report told us the world is rearming at a pace not seen since the late 1980s. The day after the Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference opened in New York with the United Nations Secretary General saying the treaty itself is eroding. And the day after the UAE announced it is walking out of OPEC. I am Zunaira Azhar and this is DECODE, where we define and analyze the stories shaping our world. These three stories, and in fact most of the geopolitical happenings lately, all look alike and are all connected. A regional bloc breaking, an energy system breaking, and a treaty breaking, all one after another and pointing in the same direction. Let us decode the night. On Tuesday, the 28th of April, the United Arab Emirates announced it will leave the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries and the wider OPEC Plus group. The exit takes effect on Friday, the 1st of May. The decision was carried by state media and confirmed by Energy Minister. The minister told the reporters that the decision was taken after a careful look at the country's energy strategies. He said the UAE did not consult Saudi Arabia or any other member before taking the call. He said this is a policy decision. It has been done after a careful look at current and future policies related to level of production. Let's look at the numbers behind the move. The UAE was OPEC's third largest producer, behind Saudi Arabia and Iraq. It accounted for about $77 billion of OPEC's $455 billion in oil sales last year, roughly 17%. Its production has been capped near 3.2 million barrels per day. The country's stated ambition is 5 million barrels per day by 2027. The political backdrop: in December, Saudi Arabia bombed shipments at the Yemeni port. Shipments, Riyadh said, were Emirati arms going to the UAE-backed Southern Transitional Council. The UAE pulled its forces out of Yemen. The Southern Transitional Council, the Emirati proxy, dissolved itself on the 9th of January. And throughout the Iran war, the UAE has been hit by Iranian missiles and drone attacks, while Riyadh has worked the Houthi-backed channel. Today, the markets reacted modestly. Oil did not move sharply. The strait is still throttled. But the political signal, analysts at Riyadh, at Columbia's Center on Global Energy Policy, at the Foundation of Defense of Democracies, was read in one voice. OPEC just lost a pillar. The Gulf Cooperation Council just stopped being one thing. Let's frame this story with context, because that is where the punchline is. The UAE did not leave OPEC over a quota dispute. The quota dispute is real. The UAE has wanted to pump more oil for years, yet it never left. What's changed is not the economics, it's the politics. If we follow the timeline together, in December, Saudi jets bombed Emirati shipments in Yemen. Fast forward January, the Southern Transitional Council created by UAE is forced into dissolution. Through February and March, Iran fires missiles at UAE, while Saudi Arabia, the former leader of the Gulf bloc, talks quietly to Tehran's proxy in Yemen. And then in April, UAE walks away from OPEC. This is the context that I talked about in the beginning, a series of related events with logic attached. The logic is also this, that UAE has decided that its security is no longer underwritten by the Gulf and that the Gulf is no longer one bloc. It is taking its own positions, with Israel through the Abraham Accords, with Washington as a separate channel from Riyadh, with Western capitals as a partner in a way that the rest of the GCC is not. And as the war progressed, an Emirati official quoted anonymously this week by an analyst at Columbia that the US, Israel, France, and other countries proved to be better allies during this war than the neighbors. This sentence is the story behind hedging differently. Better allies than the neighbors from the country that spent 50 years inside the Gulf bloc. Now, what does the OPEC exit do? Two things. One, it gives the UAE the freedom to pump aggressively when the strait reopens, which is what Abu Dhabi has wanted since at least 2023. Two, it removes the second pillar of OPEC's pricing power. Saudi Arabia and the UAE were the only two members with meaningful spare capacity. Spare capacity is the muscle behind a cartel. Take one out and the cartel can still set prices in stable markets, but it cannot defend them in a crisis. Rystad Energy called this a structurally weak OPEC, and the Foundation of Defense of Democracies said the move is good for United States. Both framings means the same thing and are correct. Another connection in this. The happening is that UAE is not just leaving OPEC. It is leaving a posture in which Gulf capitals coordinated with each other, defended each other, and each other's airspace sat at the same table with the same interests. That posture is no more. And what replaces it is a series of bilateral arrangements with whoever offers the best protection. In Abu Dhabi's case, that is Washington and Tel Aviv, which means the Emirates is buying weapons, lots of them, and so is Saudi Arabia, but from various sellers. Just that the two are not aligned the same way anymore. We have with us Paul Fritch, who is Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute, Switzerland, and he's a former US diplomat and former senior NATO official. Thank you so much, Paul, for joining us. Let us start with the OPEC story. It's the biggest one, in my opinion. The UAE energy minister said that this is a policy decision taken after a careful look at our current and future production. And he also said that we did not consult Saudi Arabia. This is explicit coming from him. From your reading, is this primarily an oil decision that happens to be politically timed, or is it a political decision dressed in the language of oil? Because we saw that coming, I suppose.
Yes, well, I think it's both. I think it is primarily driven by economic conditions, and certainly the current conflict has not made the situation easier for the UAE. But I think it would be difficult to envision such a decision being taken unilaterally if political relations between the two states were better than they are. So I think it's a sign of the kind of regional tensions that the current conflict is highlighting.
Right. If we connect this to the Saudi strikes on Mukalla in December, the dissolution of the Southern Transitional Council in January, and the ECFR assessment that the Saudi Emirati alliance has collapsed, can we string these events together? Is the UAE making a clean strategic break from its own region and choosing the West, or is this still a managed kind of a divergence that can be repaired once the war is over?
I don't think I would go so far as to say it's a clean strategic break, but I think the UAE is clearly pursuing its own interests and putting down a marker that it will want those interests to be taken into account once the current conflict is over and the states of the Gulf region come to some sort of new equilibrium.
But there were Saudi analysts who were saying that GCC needs to have a more cohesive voice, because when Washington talks to us, we shouldn't be talking separately to them. And out of this war, I thought, or many analysts thought, that there is going to be more cohesive GCC emerging. So is this a surprise to many, or is this something that we expected?
I think it might be a surprise to some. I think given the particular economic strains that this conflict has placed on the UAE, it's not a complete surprise to others. I think the decision will certainly be welcomed by some in Washington, who would like to restore some stability to energy markets. But again, I don't think it's necessarily indicative of a complete long-term break within the GCC. I think it's a sign from the UAE that when that cohesive voice is developed, it's not just going to be the voice of Saudi Arabia that's amplified by the other GCC states. I think it's a sign that that the UAE has its own interests that it will want to be taken into account.
Right. So keeping in mind OPEC and OPEC plus, UAE leaving, the beneficiary is US, of course, the shale boom and all that. And after Ukraine war, the kind of energy supplier that US became to the European market. Do you think that UAE has chosen to join a bloc which is booming at the moment? And given the security architecture, it has seen some sort of resentment as well, because UAE has been getting hits from the Iranian missiles while the Saudi Arabia was talking to Houthis at the same time. So is this a collective environment that has shifted this framework in UAE policy decision makers' mindsets?
Well, again, I think the conflict has revealed vulnerabilities for the GCC states that have been particularly evident in the UAE. And I think the UAE has been disproportionately targeted by Iranian missile strikes. I think the UAE had been counting on the presence of US bases to ensure security, and now it's had to deal with the flip side of that, which is that the presence of those same US bases has made it a target. And I think that it's imposed significant economic consequences that the current decision to leave OPEC so that it can increase its own share of the global energy market. I think that decision is designed to address those. I think that it is possible that following the conflict, the states of the region can find a new strategic equilibrium. But I think the UAE is sending a clear signal that it has its own interests, it has its own vulnerabilities, and it is willing to diversify the ways in which it's seeking to address those.
Let me bring in this rearmament numbers that we saw on Monday, the Stockholm report, which says that the world spent $2.88 trillion on weapons last year. The Middle East alone took 81% of American foreign military sales in the first quarter, over $36 billion in 3 months. So the UAE is buying, Saudi Arabia is buying, we see Israel is buying. They're not buying for the same purpose, but there is a rearmament going on in the region. How do you look at that?
Well, there is, and I think we're going to see that continue, if not accelerate, in the coming year, given the depletion of key munition stocks as the result of the conflict in Iran. The question that I think presents itself for the states of the GCC is whether the current strategy of buying high-end U.S. weapons systems is sufficient to meet their security needs. I think we may see some diversification in terms of procurement strategies. And a shift toward lower cost systems, such as the kinds of strategies that we see being deployed by Ukraine in its conflict with Russia, sort of low cost anti-drone systems and anti-missile systems that are more economically sustainable over the long term. And I think there's going to be some pressure to move in that direction given supply chain concerns. I think the U.S. is going to be under significant pressure to replenish its own stocks of these weapon systems. And they're the same weapon systems that are going to be in high demand among the Gulf states.
Yeah. Well, this brings me to my last question, because there is so much happening. The Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference opened in New York on Monday, and I was reading Secretary General said in his opening remarks that the treaty has been eroding, that trust and credibility are wearing thin, and that the drivers of proliferation are accelerating. So much is going on. A regional bloc is stripping away the GCC I'm talking about. Then OPEC is taking a different form. Then the global treaty under review, NPT. Is this a coincidence of timing, or are we witnessing in real time the global order shifting towards a real rearmament and more proliferation?
Well, I think clearly we're seeing the global order shifting toward more rearmament and the potential for additional proliferation. And I think that's happening for many reasons. I think it remains unclear what situation Iran will be in at the end of this conflict. But there are certainly going to be voices within Iran that are going to be advocating for a North Korea strategy, that is withdrawal from the NPT and overt pursuit of a nuclear deterrent. I think there are also pressures within the traditional U.S. alliances in Europe and in Asia, given the erratic signals that have been coming from the Trump administration with regard to the long-term U.S. commitment to NATO and to the alliances with Japan and South Korea. That may encourage some of those states to reconsider their role as non-nuclear states. So I think the NPT that's going on right now is particularly important in light of that global backdrop.
All right. Paul Fritch, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.